Hey everybody, it is Gothic October and I have just finished reading one of the very best Gothic novels of all time, Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. It is a story I have returned to time and again, both in book form and with the 1940 film version starring Laurence Olivier and Joan Fontaine. Both are fantastic tellings of this story. The book was originally published in 1938. It didn't take them long to make a film, and both are just staples of American and British classic literature and film. The book has been on bestseller lists in both countries ever since it was published. The film has won several awards and is just a classic. It is a pretty well-known tale, and tonight I'm going to share with you guys all of my thoughts on it regarding symbolism, regarding names, regarding psychology. I hope that you will really enjoy everything that I have to say tonight on Rebecca. Now, before I get started, I want to be very clear that this video will contain spoilers. If you do not want to hear spoilers, turn the video off now and go read the book or watch the film. The film follows the book pretty well, although it doesn't get quite as graphic as the book does. The mystery and the results at the end of the movie are sort of sanitized for the film. Alfred Hitchcock did try to make this film very close to the book. However, he was shot down by the moral police at the time, and so, but both are fantastic. But that being said, if you are okay with spoilers, here we go. I've got a lot to share with you guys. This is the copy that I most recently read. It is a book that my mom actually gave me. It was published in the 1970s. And the artwork on it looks a lot like the characters in the film. To give you just a quick overview of the story, we start out with a young, unnamed woman who is serving as a companion to Mrs. Van Hopper, who is on vacation to Monte Carlo. Mrs. Van Hopper is quite the demanding employer, but she ends up being bound to her bed for a while, and the young woman is able to have a little more freedom, and she starts going out on dates with Maxim de Winter, a wealthy estate owner who is also staying there at the hotel in Monte Carlo. She and Maxim quickly decide to get married. As a whirlwind romance. They get married and he takes her home to his estate, Manderley in Cornwall. Maxim de Winter has been married before. His wife Rebecca died in a boating accident a year before. When the new Mrs. de Winter, who remains unnamed throughout the entire story, arrives at Manderley, she meets the staff. Mrs. Danvers especially is one who makes her feel very uncomfortable and intimidated. And she soon finds out that Rebecca's memory, Rebecca's ways, Rebecca's routine, even Rebecca's scent has not yet left Manderley. It still permeates, and Mrs. Danvers especially is very loyal to Rebecca and very cold to the new Mrs. de Winter. The story goes on as Mrs. de Winter becomes more and more sort of obsessed with the idea of maybe being as good as Rebecca, and everything she does is just not enough. She gets it in her head that Maxim does not love her and misses Rebecca and regrets marrying her. She actually gets to the point where she's quite irritating to the reader because of her obsession with trying to be just like the old Mrs. de Winter, right? Just like Rebecca. When the staff ask what her preferences are, she says, do whatever the first Mrs. de Winter would have done. She doesn't change any furnishings. She doesn't change any routines. Everything kind of goes on in this way until one night there is a shipwreck. And when the diver goes down to, survey what has gone on with this shipwreck, he finds a scuttled boat. It is Rebecca's boat, and inside the boat is the body, the skeleton of someone. Maxim de Winter, who did actually go and identify a body a year before, who was supposed to have been his wife Rebecca and is now buried in his family crypt, quickly has to go and identify this new skeleton based on other information around her, right? It is just bones now, but it is sort of implied that, maybe she still had some clothing on her or jewelry, something that makes it completely undoubtable that is actually Rebecca, and that whoever is buried in Maxim's crypt is not Rebecca. The authorities just figure that he was under a lot of stress and didn't properly identify the first body, and he's off the hook and it's no big deal. There are just a couple of questions though, because when they did pull up that boat, they had the guy who built it come out and have a look at it and see if he could shed any light on the situation. And he said that there were holes put into the boat that could not have been made naturally by the rocks in the water and were not put there by him. And also that the sea cocks were open. This turns everything kind of on its head, and they change the verdict from being just an accident to being a suicide. They all believe Rebecca committed suicide. Once this information is revealed, Maxim de Winter starts privately freaking out. He pulls his wife aside and he explains to her that he actually killed his wife, Rebecca, and then he explains why. And it's basically because she ran around on him a lot, she partied a lot, she didn't respect him, and there was no love between them. He got sick of it all and shot her. The new Mrs. De Winter, like any normal woman would, says, "Oh, darling, that's totally fine, because the only thing that matters to me is that you never loved her." Because, of course, she is so obsessed with what she's built up in her mind, and she believes that he had loved her all along. When she finds out that he never loved his wife, she is overjoyed, and that is pretty much her only focus, is we've got to cover up your crime because you really do love me, and we need to live happily ever after. Maxim makes Rebecca out to be a pretty nasty woman. One of her crimes is that she was having an affair with her cousin. And her cousin actually shows up on the scene after this verdict of suicide and tells Maxim, "There's no way it was a suicide. You and I both know that." And he pretty much accuses Maxim of killing her. Maxim, of course, has to hide those circumstances, does not want to be found out, and through some very quiet and crafty manipulation, is able to convince the authorities that no, he had nothing to do with any of that, and the cousin must be crazy, and they really do get their happy ending, we think. As they come back from the final sort of inquest sort of hearing that they have, they're on their way home, Maxim and the new Mrs. De Winter, who is still nameless, and they see the lights of a burning Manderley in the distance. And the book ends there. Manderley is burning. And then once we finish that last page, we remember the beginning of the story, where the new Mrs. De Winter dreams about Manderley and talks about how they are now living in a hotel and starting a new life, and that things are good because she is feeling secure in his love for her, and he is feeling secure in his new life. Rebecca is a story with an extremely slow build. In fact, for the first 17 chapters, you are reading and thinking, where is this going? And more, the new nameless Mrs. De Winter gets on your nerves. She becomes so obsessed with what goes on in her own mind. She really does irritate the reader. And you get to the point where you're thinking, is this ever going to go anywhere? I thought this was the greatest gothic ever written. I thought this was a very spooky and weird psychological read, and all I'm reading is this woman obsessed with being just like her husband's dead wife. But then you hit chapter 18 and it gets pretty weird. And then you hit chapter 19 and everything turns on its head. And then it's just a very quick downhill from there. Once you get done with the story, you realize that everything matters, and it all comes together for one big Alfred Hitchcock-style, psychologically creepy what the heck at the ending. There are many ways to look at this story, both horrific and affirming elements. So let's talk about some of those. This is a story that asks, who is the villain here? Is it the self-centered, cheating Rebecca, who disappoints and then taunts and then risks embarrassing Maxim throughout their marriage? Is it Maxim, who ruthlessly kills her and then effortlessly lies to cover it all up? Is it the unnamed second Mrs. De Winter, whose only concern is really if Maxim actually loves her? The ending of the story provokes all kinds of conspiracy theories, and it actually allows us to read this as a circle. Like I said, we can start at the beginning of the story again and get a feel for what happens after the events signaled at the end take place. But for those who prefer a neat bow to wrap up the end of their stories, this ending is nowhere near satisfying. We wonder, is Maxim's description of Rebecca even accurate? No one else has described her in the way that Maxim has. Most other characters thought that Rebecca was pretty great. Frank, one of Maxim's friends, does seem uneasy when her name comes up, but we also find out that Rebecca was kind of hitting on him, so maybe there's some embarrassing sort of guilt and not virtue that makes him act the way that he does. Mrs. Danvers pulls no punches when it comes to describing Rebecca's heathenistic lifestyle. It's almost like she's proud of it, but she's also clearly mentally unstable. So can we even trust Mrs. Danvers? Maxim's sister Beatrice doesn't seem to like her, but we also learned that Rebecca was hitting on her husband. They also seem to have very different personalities, so maybe it's nothing more than just some deep-seated jealousy. We are made to feel sympathetic towards Maxim because we want his new marriage to work out. We want it to work out for his unnamed wife's sake, but also for his sake. We want them to have a happy ending. But what if Maxim is extremely over-exaggerating Rebecca's character? What if he really is just an evil, cold-blooded killer? I mean, he is a cold-blooded killer. We don't actually see anything or hear about anything regarding Rebecca that makes it worth killing her over. So part of the psychological creepiness of this story is that we do actually have sympathy for a cold-blooded killer. He charms us because he has charmed our narrator, the new Mrs. De Winter. But there's another question. What is wrong with this woman that she could so easily blow off the fact that she's married to a cold-blooded killer? We never see her lying awake at night processing through all of that. It never really occurs to her that he could bump her off too for absolutely no reason. Or just because she embarrassed him or hurt his pride. She validates his crime and she does all she can to cover it up. But it never crosses her mind that his reasons for murdering his wife are all based on avenging and protecting his pride. What happens when his pride is bruised again? What happens when it's her fault, right? She never thinks these things, and I want to say that any normal person would be red flagging all over the place, but, wouldn't they do what they needed to leave the situation immediately? Maybe not. Maybe that's not always the easy response. This woman's neurotic behavior and her constant mind dialogue shows us that she was fixated on the idea that Maxim is in love with his dead wife, and that she can never ever measure up to that. When she finds out that he not only hated Rebecca, but he actually killed her, she's relieved, thankful, overjoyed. She feels like her life is just beginning. No, I don't actually think that's a normal response. That's some of the psychologically weird elements of this story. Maybe we shouldn't think about this story too deeply. If we do, we realize that these two are actually heartless villains. We realize we might be heartless villains too if we are rooting for them, right? If we rooted for their happiness all throughout this crazy story, what does that say about us? There's a lot of focus on names throughout the story, and even the absence of names is noteworthy. We don't know the name of the narrator. It's never mentioned, but she makes passive mention of her name repeatedly. She says that Maxim called her by her first name from the very beginning. In chapter 6, she calls herself Mrs. De Winter. She says, "I would be Mrs. De Winter." So she names herself. At the end of chapter 5, she makes it clear that Rebecca had called him Max, and so she would call him Maxim. We'll talk a little more about that in a minute. Calling someone by their name often shows that you care about them, or at the very least you accept them. Mrs. De Winter talks about 2 dogs in the story. One of them is an older dog who doesn't show her affection, and the other is a younger dog who is friendly to her. She never tells us the name of the older, kind of rude dog, right? But she does tell us and repeatedly names the second dog. His name is Jasper. The meaning of names is often very important in a story. The meaning of the name Rebecca is to tie or to bind. The meaning of the word Maxim is a general truth. Both of these name meanings are symbolic from the perspective of our narrator. Rebecca's memory and influence has the new Mrs. De Winter bound in comparison, in jealousy, in paranoia. She cannot function normally. She is bound. She's all tied up. Her hands are tied when it comes to moving forward as the mistress of Manderley, because Rebecca is everywhere. Her scent, her style, her routine, her authority. The real truth is that Mrs. De Winter has had full freedom and authority the whole time. She was bound in her mind only. And then for Maxim, the general truth, Maxim is the new Mrs. De Winter's sole focus and priority. She overlooks every flaw, every attitude. She worships at his feet. He is her only truth, and her pathetic devotion can be extremely off-putting to someone new to the story. It's all for a purpose, though. Stick with it. And it's necessary to make the story work. Had she been able to see any other truth, she would never have colluded with him to cover up his crimes in the end. There are other symbolic elements in the story that make for some really intriguing rabbit trails. One involves how dust equals death and water equals cleanliness. In chapter 6, Mrs. De Winter burns a page with Rebecca's name on it. The big swooping R is the last to go. She says the flame destroyed it. It was not ashes even. It was feathery dust. She says she washes her hands and has a clean new feeling. Later in chapter 23, she talks about Rebecca lying in the crypt in a coffin, and she says she's dust, only dust. Just after 7, the rains begin to fall, and she stands at the window and breathes the cool, clean air. She lets it splash on her face and hands. It's very reminiscent of that first back in chapter 6. And by the end of the story, Manderley is dust too, and the ashes blow at them on the wind from the sea. Daphne du Maurier uses rhododendrons in the story to represent Rebecca's memory. A rhododendron has historically symbolized beauty and elegance, but also warning, danger, and a harbinger of bad things to come. In chapter 7, Mrs. De Winter says that the towering red rhododendrons are like none other that she's seen. She says they're too beautiful. They're too powerful. In chapter 8, she says the rhododendrons are encroaching, and then they're all around the room. Rebecca, just like these crazy flowers, is just too much. Too much in her head, too much to worry about, too much to try to emulate. She's encroaching on every part of the new Mrs. De Winter's life. She's too beautiful. She's too powerful. Now, the story does have some positive messages too. We see kind of the insecurity of new romance. Mrs. De Winter builds up an image in her head of Rebecca being an unmatchable rival for Maxim's love. She's so horrible to herself. She's so down on herself. It really makes you pity her when you read some of the things that she says about herself. And she has no idea that the relationship between Max and Rebecca was not all that she has imagined. And then we even see Maxim's vulnerability later in the story in chapter 20. He says that he thought that she seemed aloof and unhappy and bored with him. He thinks that maybe he was too old for her and maybe she was more attracted to his younger friend, Frank. She says no, she just thought he was still in love with Rebecca and was regretting marrying her. And isn't that just like it is, right? When you're new in a relationship and have a little bit of insecurity, it's really a picture of the things that most lovers do go through when they're trying to learn how to communicate well. The way that she is in her head is so relatable to me. Whether it's because of her fear or her insecurity, she builds up so many things in her mind and goes on and on with internal dialogue that sometimes that internal dialogue seems more real than reality. There's really no one truly against her for her own sake in this story. The closest thing that she has to an enemy is Mrs. Danvers, and it's clear that Mrs. Danvers would have hated anyone who stood in Rebecca's place. She was just loyal to Rebecca. One part that I found really humorous was at the end of chapter 12, Maxim is silent, and Mrs. De Winter goes on in her head about all the things he must be thinking, right? The beautiful romantic things about Rebecca and resentful, horrible things about her. Her mind is chaotic with all of these thoughts, and finally she has the courage to ask him, "What are you thinking?" And he says he's thinking about sports. He confirms that in chapter 16. He's like, if I said I was thinking about the game, I was thinking about the game. It's like, not that complicated. Mrs. De Winter misses so many opportunities to see affirmations because she's so focused on her own insecurities. At the end of chapter 5, when she says, "And I had to call him Maxim," she thinks that this is a second best name, but she has no right to call him Max and ruin whatever the, specialness of Rebecca calling him Max. She'd made up so much in her mind about what she thought their love was like that when they really hated each other from the very beginning. She missed so much. In chapter 6, she tells him that Mrs. Van Hopper, her old employer, had said that she didn't belong at Manderley. And he gets annoyed and he says that I'm the one who decides who belongs at Manderley. It's my estate, not Mrs. Van Hopper, not any of these, staff that we have. I'm the one who decides. He's telling her that she belongs there simply because he wants her there. And in chapter 11, his friend Frank says all kinds of nice things to reassure her, but she just completely misses it all. She focuses instead on her outward appearance. And her last question is, tell me, was Rebecca very beautiful? I thought the guy's just slapping his forehead. Come on. This story is perfection. A slow and steady build, no boring spots, everything means something. And the end leaves so much scope for the imagination. If you have not yet, Rebecca, I would highly recommend you go out, grab this book, or at least watch the film as quickly as you can. As of now, it's free on YouTube to watch the 1940 version with Laurence Olivier and Joan Fontaine. I would highly recommend that you check it out. I hope that you enjoyed this video essay. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see more like this on other books. Have a great day, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye.